Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday, you said tomorrow, so just do it! Make your dreams come true! Just do it!
Welcome to Successful Dropout. This podcast is for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those that dare to dream and act on their dreams. I'm your host, Kylan Ginger. Join me as we find out what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. What is up, Successful Dropouts? Get stoked because today on the show we have Grant Schroll. Grant is a co-founder at Mission Collaborative, which is an organization that runs nights and weekends programs to help young professionals make career changes. He's passionate about helping people build careers they love and redesigning higher education to better serve learners today and throughout their lives. So, Grant, given what you do, you are in the right place, you're on the right show. I'm super stoked to get into it, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do first.
Hey, yeah, thank you so much for having me on, first of all.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. So I guess by means of background, let me start with a story because I think it helps illustrate why I do any of the things that I'm doing nowadays. So
yes,
coming out of high school, yeah, right. So coming out of high school, I had a lot of sort of adult figures in my life encouraging me to pursue engineering. And really the only reason for that is because I was a Legos kid. I loved playing with my Legos. I loved problem solving. And so naturally engineering is the path that you should be on.
Dude, who wasn't a Legos kid, man?
I know, right?
How many Legos did you have, by the way?
Oof, man, quite a few.
I remember that was sort of like a status symbol growing up. It's like if you had more Legos than your friends, you know, it was like currency. It was like money nowadays, and we'd trade all the time. Like, did you guys do that sort of stuff?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I remember one of the next door neighbors had a garage sale, and he got rid of probably 3 giant tubs worth of Legos, and I went back and forth all day until I'd pretty much bought all of them.
Like the big plastic bins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right.
But my crowning achievement, I had a project in 8th grade. It was around World War II, and you could write an essay, you could do something or other, and I decided to take a more creative approach. So I found this World War II era destroyer ship, and I decided I was going to make a Lego model of it. So I built this 5-foot long Lego ship modeled directly after this historical World War II thing, and I brought it into class.
5 feet.
It was fantastic. Everybody loved it. I got a nice grade on it, and it was not at all a painful project for me. It was probably the best one I did.
Do you have any pictures of that anywhere?
Yeah, they exist.
They exist. I can tell. We can look back on some of our really old photo albums from when I was a kid and see several pictures of things I built. But kids like you, I always looked up to kids like you because I could never build anything that big. I mean, I built some pretty cool stuff, but I did have a couple friends that would build you said 5 feet. Yeah, like one of my buddies, Dominic, shout out to you if you're listening, man. But this guy built like a 4 or 5 foot long replica of a Star Destroyer.
Nice.
Yeah, oh man, I just always looked up to kids like you because I never felt like I could build something that big and that elaborate. Anyways, let's go back to the story.
Project, because of the Lego infatuation, I went off to school to study engineering. And 2 years into it, I was getting pretty disillusioned because the vast majority of my classes were not around building stuff and problem solving. Instead, it was all theory. It was a lot of the prerequisite stuff that for some reason we've decided is necessary to solve problems. And so I was feeling pretty darn checked out. And then I ended up landing an internship after my sophomore year where I went and worked at a startup car company out in California. And in my mind, this was supposed to be the sort of pinnacle of everything that I was working towards. And so I was really excited to get out there and kind of be inspired by, hey, this is the path that I'm on. And the exact opposite happened. I really just hated it. It was not at all what I expected. It was not a culture that I felt drawn to. I realized that a lot of my greatest strengths weren't at all being utilized in this particular engineering path. And so long story short, I completely changed my mindset about the purpose of college. I realized that if I was going to get real value out of my time in school, I needed to be much more thoughtful and intentional about how I spent it. And so really I started investing in things outside of the classroom. I got really invested in different student orgs. I actually started my first business. I became really good at networking and just meeting people and becoming fearless about reaching out to folks and making a value proposition. And so by the time I was done with college, I had kind of landed on my mission moving forward, which was really about helping other people hack their way to a better college experience. That was the initial mission. And so the first thing that I did upon graduating was I actually launched this sort of social enterprise organization that was focused on helping first and second year college students make the most out of their time in school, stop going through the motions, quit treating it like a treadmill, and be more thoughtful, be more intentional, figure out what is it you want to get out of these next couple of years that will really make this a transformative experience for you. And so I built this organization. We held a bunch of different pilot programs with students. And I got to tell you, it was one of the most inspiring years of my life because I just became such a strong believer that young people are capable of doing incredible things and really going far above and beyond the expectations that we normally put on them in a classroom setting. And yet I couldn't get any support from the university. Here I had this program that students were asking for, that students were raving about, and the university felt like we were a threat to some of the stuff they were already offering. So long story short, I ended up having to close down the organization because we couldn't figure out a financial model for it. But the experience as a whole really convinced me that there is just such a huge opportunity to redesign the way that we do higher education and really education in general. And so ever since then, that's kind of been my path. That's been my passion. Thinking about how do we redesign 21st century learning environments to cultivate 21st century people. And so today, the work that I do with my current startup, Mission Collaborative, is all about helping adults who, by the way, still haven't quite figured out what they want to do in the world or how to do it effectively. We help people make career changes, and we help people be more thoughtful about what they want to build in the world and how they want to live their lives. And we host nights and weekends programs to help people make that change to a better, more fulfilling career and lifestyle. So that's kind of the short version of how I've gotten to where I'm at today.
I love it, man. I love that you've sort of discovered your niche, like your thing, the one thing that if Grant didn't do, nobody else would do. Love that. Now you said something, you said it's amazing what young people, what we are capable of at that age. Now, I'd be curious to know, in your experience and for what you've learned, why don't people rise to their full capability, especially in like a college environment? Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do with the sort of social norms of the sort of traditional path that we put young people on. You're expected to graduate high school. You're expected to go off and pursue some sort of post-secondary education. And all along the way, we're really just expected to kind of check boxes. And what we're failing to do is push people to be the author of their own story. Instead, we're just chasing these external motivators. And very few people in our lives are actually encouraging us to look inside ourselves and figure out who am I really? What do I really care about? What motivates me? And how am I going to build something in the world that reflects the person that I am and the contribution that I want to make? Yeah. Those types of questions don't get asked in traditional education. They don't get asked in college. And it's really not until people find themselves years into the workforce feeling unfulfilled that they start asking these questions to themselves. And at that point, for a lot of folks, it's really too late to make the dramatic life changes that you wish that you had figured out way, way earlier. So for me, I'm a really big advocate of the importance of sort of self-reflection and self-determination. And yet there's a huge opportunity for our institutions to facilitate that, right? We shouldn't just hope that everybody takes the time to look inward and figure it out. We should be helping folks do this, especially when they're in higher education.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's like I'm talking with Stephen Worley again. I get why you guys are friends, man. That was the biggest thing he was
Yeah,
preaching
that's
is
right.
like self-awareness, self-awareness, self-awareness.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, that
absolutely.
really is one of the biggest missing, factors, I think, in people going through high school, college is you said something that I say all the time. You get on that conveyor belt and sort of get on this pipeline and just do what you're supposed to do, check off the boxes, without really taking the time to become self-aware or pursue that or develop yourself enough to understand what you really should do. And you were saying something interesting when we were trying to meet and do this interview last time, that something to the extent that you've discovered like one of the biggest issues with college nowadays is that students go there to learn what to do, basically. Do you want to talk about
Right.
that again? Do you remember that?
Yeah. So just the backdrop for this is about 2 years ago, I started a new consulting job working for an education technology company. And so I spent about 18 months traveling all over the country, meeting with different colleges
That's
and
right, yeah.
universities, and talking with them about the challenges they're facing as it relates to graduating and retaining students. And so all these schools are trying to figure out, how do we actually keep our students here, keep them engaged, and ultimately help them graduate? And a lot of these schools assume that the problem is that this form is too hard to fill out, or the professors are not giving enough personalized attention, or the students just need a mobile app that we can communicate through to them. And from my perspective, having visited all these different schools and actually talked with students, the real challenge is one that's much deeper. The real challenge is that for a lot of students, they don't know why they're there. They're just going through the motions. They are literally only there because this is the path that society told them they need to be on. And as a result, they're not in the driver's seat. They're not in control of their own future and destiny. They're letting life happen to them. And this, in my mind, is a huge missed opportunity, right? And so something that I really preach a lot, both with adults as well as with younger learners, is it's really hard to aspire to something that you don't know exists. So think about it this way. How can you aspire to become a particular type of, to work in a certain field if you don't even know that field exists? If you've never met somebody who works in cryptocurrencies, or if you've never heard of this as a concept, well, then how could you ever acquire a skill set that would allow you to do that? And so something that I think college does a really bad job of is exposing people to the huge multiplicity of options that are even out there in the real world. Because for college, it's a very insular environment. You pick a major and all of your sort of experiences fall under that very traditional sort of route. And so something that I often tell people is like, focus on your skills and your values and your ambitions and see where they might align in the world. When you reach out to people, when you talk with folks, when you network, when you meet new people, tell them about what gets you excited, what you're really good at, what you feel passionately about, and be really perceptive to what they share with you in response. They might say something like, "Oh, have you ever heard of this field? Have you ever heard of this organization? Have you ever thought about going into this type of job?" The reality is that the world is super diverse, and there's tons of changing ways that you can make a living and make a contribution. And if we're not listening and paying attention and actively seeking out these different pathways, we end up sort of pigeonholing ourselves into just these very traditional, really outdated mindsets about what we can even do in the world. And in my mind, that's what college does to people, is it puts them into a box where they're no longer thinking about all the different ways that they could use the skills they have to make an impact and a contribution in the world. Instead, they're just focused on, well, I'm an accounting major, so I got to go into a traditional accounting role, and there's these big four accounting firms that I've heard of, so this is the path for me. And that's just a really limited existence.
Yeah, man, which is just the opposite of what you would think, right? I mean, when people think of college or higher education, you kind of think of, hey, this is a place I would go to be exposed to new ideas or new directions in life, or just exposed to something more than maybe what I grew up with in my hometown. quickly that's not becoming the case. I mean, it was interesting. A previous guest on the show, he did a Facebook post the other day, and he asked a question: what did you study in college, or what job did you want to do in college? What did you want to do in college, and are you doing that now? And it was an amazing, almost, I would roughly 90% of everybody, and there was a lot of comments, a couple hundred.
Right.
Most people were not doing the job that they sort of went to college for, or they weren't doing a job that was associated with the degree they got. And many of them, and you're finding this to be more and more common, are in jobs that didn't even exist when they went to college. And it's because 100%. Things are just progressing so fast. Again, I talked about this, Stephen and I talked about this, how he basically was like, it's pointless to just do your 5-10 year goals, even 2-3 year goals nowadays. I mean, personally, when I was a kid growing up, we did this with our family. Luckily, I had great parents to help us do this, but we'd make 5-year goals and stuff like that. Nowadays, I just don't do that anymore. I mean, a year at the most is what I think about, because things just change so quick. I mean, you mentioned cryptocurrency. I mean, a year ago, I hadn't even heard of it. Now it's actually a big part of my life. And for most other people, that's the case as well. And it just shows you that in 12 months in this day and age, what can happen and what can change.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so the other question I wanted to ask you, though, is, so you mentioned this program. You were in college, you discovered that what you were doing was not right for you. You turned to self-awareness, and you discovered sort of, hey, I want to help people sort of find their way and discover their path. And you started this organization that you ended up having to shut down. But I'm curious, though, to hear maybe briefly, what was your process for helping students? Because it might help some people listening. I mean, when a student would sort of join your organization or sign up for your program, I don't know what it looked like, but what were some of the steps that you led them through to sort of awaken more of this self-awareness?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, quite frankly, the process that we were using with college students is really not any different than the process that I use now with adults who are trying to make career changes.
So let's talk about Mission Collaborative then, and what you guys do. Do you guys work with any students or younger, or is it pretty much all adults?
We don't. I'd say the youngest participants that we ever see in our programs are probably in their mid-20s, and the oldest are in their late 50s. And I'd say the average comes in around mid-30s.
Okay, but the process is pretty similar. But
the process is pretty similar, because at the end of the day, this is a process that I think anybody can use for a lot of different things in their lives. But anyways, we call it the sort of career design process, but you can even think of it as a life design process. And so we think of it as 4 steps. And step 1 is what we call reflection. So reflection is, who am I? What do I care about? What am I good at? And what do I want to do in the world? And basically, we create a whole bunch of different activities and processes that help people actually answer those questions and boil them down to their essence. And with our career changers, we have them summarize all of these factors into what we call the personal mission statement. So the personal mission statement is meant to be a sort of foundation to everything you do moving forward, because you can always look back at your personal mission statement and then ask yourself the question, is what I'm about to do or what I'm considering doing, does that align with my personal mission statement? Does this actually further my goals as a person? And so I would say the same thing works for anybody. And we did something very similar with our college students, where before you choose a major, before you start thinking about what kind of career path you want to pursue, start by taking inventory of who you are as a person today. And so that's really what the reflection phase is all about.
I love that. I mean, personal mission statement, that's our lives revolve around that, especially this time of year. And it's something my wife and we say that every day, and we have one for our family that, we hope to pass down to our kids when we have them, in 20, 30 years or so.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it's now I got to see if I can remember it. We as a family lead generations of people to live in extreme ownership, achieve their full potential, to live gratefully and to love unconditionally is ours. And I think I want to revise it still a little bit. I want to put something that has a little bit more of like an entrepreneurial flair in there, because that's such a big part of our lives. But yeah, those are so powerful. So it's awesome that you're doing that. So that's sort of the first part under the sort of reflection step.
That's right. Yes. Well, so that's kind of how we culminate the reflection step, is by having folks actually craft their personal mission statement as a sort of a war cry of sorts that people can always refer back to anytime they're feeling stuck. So after the reflection piece, we move on to what we call definition. And definition is all about defining the different potential pathways that align with your personal mission statement and also check some of the important logistic boxes that you might need to feel fulfilled. So something that we talk about as far as logistics go is, how much money do you need to make to live the lifestyle that you want to live? What sort of geographies are acceptable? Like, are you willing to move and change cities, or do you need to stay here? We also talk about things like culture. What sort of culture do you want to be a part of when you're thinking about organizations you might want to work with, or even starting your own thing? But all of these are sort of logistic considerations that are really important as you try to define different potential career paths. And so I would say the same thing still applies when thinking about like high school students, college students, whatever.
Yeah.
As you're thinking about how you want to focus your studies or your pursuits, try to define the different paths that align nicely with the mission statement that you've created for yourself, the person that you want to become. And a big part of defining these different paths is just becoming aware of what options there even are, right? And this is something I kind of mentioned earlier. It's really hard to choose a path that you don't know exists. And so especially early on, I think it's really important for people to just be inquisitive and curious about the world around you. Ask people about what they do for a living or what they do in the world, and ask them why they do it, and tell them what it is you're interested in and get their reactions to it and hear what they say. I've found that the more that you wear your sort of mission statement on your sleeve, the more people are compelled to try to help you out and to try to share ideas and resources and facilitate connections on your behalf. So for anybody who's trying to figure out, man, what do I want to do with my life? Start by defining that mission statement, and then just share it with the world, share it with everybody, post it on Facebook, post it on LinkedIn, and people will start steering you in the right direction. And after that, your job becomes testing which of these different options is actually the best fit for you. And so that actually takes us to the third stage in our process, which is what we call the testing phase. And so the testing phase is, all right, great. You've now defined 2, 3, 4 different potential paths. How do you actually figure out which of those is the best one to pursue? And so when we're working with people trying to make career changes, we encourage them to sort of take these different career paths for a test drive prior to committing to it. And so there's a lot of ways that we teach people to test drive careers prior to actually applying for any new jobs or anything like that. But again, the same thing holds true with somebody who's just trying to figure out what they want to do with their life at all. Try stuff out. Once you've got 2 or 3 different clearly defined paths, there are a lot of ways that you can sort of test drive those paths without fully committing to them. So I actually just did a LinkedIn video about this, and it has proven to be the most popular piece of content that I've yet created. It's got thousands of views right now, and I'm really psyched about it.
Right on.
But we kind of talk about how there's this spectrum of usefulness when it comes to test driving different paths. On the lowest, least effective end of the spectrum, there's think about it. Think about whether or not this is a path you'd like. You can really only get so far inside your own head. On the opposite end of the spectrum, which is most effective for figuring out if this is right for you, there's what we call the sort of collaborative project, which is another way of saying go out and actually do this thing that you're considering pursuing, and do it with an organization or a person who actually does it full time, right? And so along this spectrum, there's a lot of different mechanisms that you can employ to test whether or not a particular
like internships,
right? So
example.
internships would be an example, but there's also easier stuff, right? There's this idea of the informational interview, which is just talking with people who are practitioners. There's this idea of go to meetups and other events where people who
job
actually do this.
shadowing.
Yeah, there's job shadowing, and then there's another one that I really like, which is just imagine that you've actually been given the job that you're thinking about pursuing. What's the first project that you would be assigned? Create the project yourself.
Interesting.
Like, pretend that you've literally been handed the job and just start doing it on your own. You don't need to ask for permission, but you're going to have to get really creative, and you'll figure out really quickly how well you do or don't understand this role, this organization, when you start trying to craft the project and then execute the project. And the value of doing this is twofold. It's number one, it helps you figure out if this is actually something that resonates, if this is something that truly gets you excited and aligns with your skills and your ambitions. And number two, if it does, you've now got a really awesome portfolio piece. You've now got some really great talking points. And when you do go out and talk with employers or whatever, you can stand out from everybody else by saying, listen, I know that I'm a great fit for this role because I've already been doing some of the work that you're trying to hire me for. And let me show you what I've produced. Let me show you how what I do is great, right? So anyways, that's kind of the test phase. And at this point, it's really iterative. So we talked about reflection, then definition, and then testing. The fourth phase is what we call launch, which is actually go out and land the job in the career path that you've chosen. But for a lot of folks, they'll get to the testing piece and they'll try out a career path, and they'll realize, oh wait, this is not what I expected. This is not what I want. Now what? And that's where you go back to the reflection piece, right? It's a cycle. It's reflect, define, test, go back to reflect. So this is another really important piece here, which is that figuring out your life is not a linear process. It's messy.
Oh, totally.
Right? It's messy.
Yeah.
You'll think that you've got something figured out, and then something new will come up, and you'll have to make a change. And the other thing that I've come to appreciate as I've gotten older is that life gets more complex too. You all of a sudden settle down with a partner, and now you've got the additional responsibilities of a partner. Eventually you have kids potentially, and now you've got the additional responsibilities of parenthood. Eventually you decide to buy a home, and now you've got that responsibility, right? So the point is, your life will change. The constraints that you have to operate within will change. Your responsibilities will change. And along with this, your sort of risk tolerance will change. And so it's really valuable to have a process that you can use anytime you're thinking about making a major life change or career change. And so that's really what we preach with Mission Collaborative is, hey, here's a process that you can use not only right now, but also 5 years down the road when your industry is changing, or when you've decided you want something new and different, or when all of a sudden you have 3 kids and this great nonprofit job is just not cutting it as far as the bills go, right? So that's why I think the process approach to designing a life and a career is so valuable.
Dude, I love all of that. There's so much to respond to. It's so again, to just do a quick overview, it's reflection, who am I, what do I care about, what do I want to do in the world, etc.
Yep.
Definition, where do you want to move geographically, like how much money do you need to live your ideal lifestyle, what kind of culture do you want to work in, etc. And then testing phase, go out and test different potential paths, and then launch. And then if that doesn't work out, circle back around, start from the top again. Yeah, that's so cool. I love the testing phase because, man, that's so great. I feel like if you're listening right now and you sort of fall into this category that Grant's talking about how can you know what you're supposed to do or to go down a certain path if you don't even know it exists? If you feel like you fall into that category, man, after you do this sort of reflection, definition, these 2 phases, like if I were you, I would pick 1 month or even 2 months and just focus every week, make that about a different direction or a different career or a different type of job, and just focus on that, do all the things we talked about of sort of, experiencing what it might be like to be doing that full time, and just, every week, something different.
Yeah, I love
I think
that.
that would be great. Because honestly, Grant, that's probably one of the biggest questions we get, or one of the most frequent rather, is, and maybe I'd love you to just give some additional advice on this too. The question is, I have too many interests. What do I do? What do I do first? I remember being 18 years old, and I felt like, and my brother's that age right now, and I kind of see it in him. Like, you feel like you have to have your whole life figured out at that point, your whole life trajectory, and that if you don't get started now, you're not going to succeed when you're supposed to. You're not going to sort of check these boxes that maybe a lot of your peers and stuff are checking if you don't pick the right thing and the only thing you're going to do now. So people are always asking, I have a ton of, I have like 10 different interests, but I don't know which one to pursue right now. What kind of advice would you give to them? Like, how should they approach that? Well, we've talked about how they should probably approach it, but like, how should they think about that? Should they be worried about picking one thing right now?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. Comes up all the time. I used to talk a lot about this concept of passion, like find your passion and everything falls into place and it makes sense. I now
so did a lot of people,
right. Yeah, I talked about that a lot when I was younger, and now I don't believe in that at all.
Same.
Yeah, it is. There is no one thing out there in the world that if you find it, you'll be set for life. That's get rid of that. That is a limit.
It's a myth.
It is a limiting
really
belief. It is totally just going to make you unhappy, right?
Yeah.
So your question is, all right, listen, I've got a whole bunch of different interests. How do I know where to start, what to pursue? What I would say in response to that is, think about the type of person that you want to be, the types of skills and strengths that you want to cultivate, and the type of impact that you want to have in the world. There are many different paths that you can take that leverage your strengths, that align with your values and ambitions, and that will have some sort of impact towards the things that you care about. There are many paths that can all take you in the direction that you want to go. And thinking that one of those paths is the end-all be-all correct path is a limiting belief. It's okay to start down one path, pursue it for a year, and then change your mind and decide that you want to move on to something different. That is totally okay. Yep. The theme or the trend that you need to be paying attention to is like, what is the thread that connects my experiences together? What is the overarching sort of impact that I want to make that I can make sure that each of my activities aligns to, right? So when I think about it for me personally, the overarching impact that I want to have is I want to help people figure out how they can be their fullest selves and make their fullest contribution to the world. All of my professional experiences so far and personal experiences have had something to do with that. Now, I've had many different approaches to that sort of mission, but they've all had something to do with helping people figure out how to be their fullest selves and make their fullest contribution. And so my encouragement to people who are trying to figure out, how do I narrow down what it is I want to do? My encouragement would be, start by doing a lot of this reflection work. So it's really clear which of these different options actually aligns with who you want to be and what you want to create. So that's one way you can narrow stuff down. But after that, just get out there and start doing it, right? Like, you don't sit there and be paralyzed by all the options. Just choose one that you think is probably one of the better, and go out and fully dive into it, fully invest in it, and you'll figure out pretty quickly whether or not it's the right path for you. And if you have to make the change, that's totally fine. You'll learn something along the way, you'll course correct, and you'll ultimately find yourself narrowing in on a sort of more straight. It's not a straight line per se, but your interests will converge, right? So
you kind of settle into your groove.
Exactly. Settle into your groove. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, because I'm right at that stage. So I just turned 28, and I'm just now getting to the point in my life where I do feel like I'm settling into this groove. And I've told my story a couple times, and I hope it encourages some people in regards to this question, this exact thing we're talking about, because I didn't have, I've never done just one thing. I never felt like I was meant to do just one thing. And so from the time I was 18 till now, like, I've been I've been a youth pastor in ministry. I've been worked in as like a construction grunt, like less than minimum wage job. I've been in the military. I've started, 4 or 5 different businesses in 4 or 5 different industries. The podcast, the music for a long time, but so I've done a lot because I've had a lot of interest and decided to go here, to go there, and I've some places like the first business I started went great, taught me a lot. 3 years into it, it was just like this is not something I can do long term. Right. I'm not meant for this, and I'm getting up too many mornings in a row saying like I don't enjoy my life right now, and it worked to switch. But I love what you said, Grant, about sort of the thread that ties them all together, and for me, just it'll happen if you're aware and you just pay attention, just to encourage people out there. Because for me, I'm just finally discovering one of these central threads is that I love like building community. I love helping people and leading people and influencing people to become the best versions of themselves. And it's manifested in all sorts of different ways, from when my very first job as a youth pastor, like that was literally my job description. And then even in like the military, like being a leader, and in business, like building things that made people's lives better. And then now with the podcast and the Successful Dropout community, love you guys. But it's totally true what you just said, and I think that's really encouraging for some people to hear.
Totally. Hey, the one other thing that I just wanted to throw out there for all you listeners is if you go to our website, missioncollaborative.com, we've got this free resource that we call the Career Design Starter Guide that you can download right from the homepage of the site. And it includes that framework we talked about, the reflection, definition, testing, launching. It includes the framework and also gives you lots of suggestions for different ways that you can work on the process. So it's a great resource for anybody who's trying to figure out what they want to do next.
Perfect, man. You beat me to it. I was just about to ask that. We'll have that all in the show notes. For now, Grant, we're coming to the end of our time here, but there's 2 questions I want to ask you before I let you go. I ask these of every guest on the show, and the first one, though, is what parting advice do you have for any of our listeners who are thinking of, dropping out basically dropping out of school or stepping off the conveyor belt, more, to use your words. And this could be, we won't say like dropping out of school. We'll call it like just dropping out of checking the boxes, dropping out of just riding that conveyor belt. What would you have, just parting advice for somebody who is thinking of doing that, but they haven't quite made that step yet?
Yeah. The first thing that I'd say is push yourself to become really, really self-aware. And that will probably resonate based on some of the other interviews that you've listened to recently. Yeah. But you really got to know yourself. You got to know what you're good at, what your weaknesses are. You have to know what motivates you, what gives you energy. Because the last thing that you want to do is jump ship without really knowing what that entails. And I've made that mistake in my own life where I left a job prior to having anything lined up for what came next. And it was really difficult. I thought that the freedom of not having structure and somebody else telling me what to do was going to be liberating. But because I hadn't yet put in the time to figure out what I was going to do with that free time and how I was going to manage myself, it was really difficult. It was really challenging. And so, I would just encourage you, before you make any drastic life changes, spend a lot of time reflecting, thinking about who am I? What do I care about? What do I want to create in the world? What kind of impact do I want to have? And once you feel really comfortably that you can answer those questions and you know who you are and you know what you want to do with your time, that's when I'd say, go ahead and make the decision that makes most sense for you. So that'd be the first thing, self-awareness, get to know yourself. The second thing I'd say is, you don't have to go all or nothing. You can, like, if you're somebody who's in school right now, but you're not feeling totally fulfilled, I would encourage you to not necessarily just drop out right away, but instead think about, okay, I still have X number of hours a week that I'm not in classes, that I'm not doing homework. How do I maximize that time to pursue some of these other interests, to start figuring out what I do want to do next, and what have you. And a great example of this is actually what I'm doing right now. I still have a full-time day job in addition to what I'm building with Mission Collaborative. And as much as I want to just quit that full-time day job so I can focus on Mission Collaborative, I've actually found that it's made me more effective in the time that I do have for Mission Collaborative, right? So it's like, you know,
you don't have time to like just mess around.
Yeah,
it's
exactly,
like you have to do the things that push it the most right now.
Exactly.
You have to really think of that, the 80-20 principle, that the 20% of decisions and like output that produces 80% of the results.
Exactly. So what I would encourage anybody who's feeling stuck and ready to make a major change is just, you don't necessarily have to go all or nothing. You can do a little bit of both. So if you're currently in college, but you're thinking about dropping out to start your own business, I would encourage you to get as far as you possibly can with your business before you drop out. Or if you're somebody who is in a job right now that you're just ready to quit, before you do quit, start cultivating relationships and figuring out what your next move will be. Maybe pick up some consulting work or just take on a part-time job or whatever. There are ways that you can kind of have both before you have to really make a commitment one way or the other.
Awesome advice, man. And how about some parting advice for any of our listeners who already have dropped out, they're already past that stage, and who are now on that journey?
Yeah. So for folks who already have dropped out, I suppose, your challenge is probably, how do I make the most of the time that I now have and the pursuits that I'm working on, and how do I turn this into a sustainable lifestyle? I guess my similar advice, I suppose, just continue being really self-aware and doing a lot of that self-reflection. Think about, what am I learning? What do I still need to learn? Cultivate as many relationships as possible with people and organizations that can kind of further your goals. And yeah, don't be ashamed for a second that you don't have the college degree. If anything, wear it as a badge of honor that you've been able to defy the odds and prove to people that you don't need this sort of socially imposed credential to be a valuable contributor in society. I think that's super awesome. And in many ways, I find myself kind of ashamed of my formal pedigree. Which is silly to say.
It's so funny. It's so funny how that has actually switched.
I know, right? It's strange. And maybe maybe it's a privilege to be able to say that. But I will tell you that my younger brother dropped out of college because he started a business, and by the time he was a sophomore, the business was really taking off, and so he didn't bother going back. And here now, 6 years later, he is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, and he doesn't have a degree. And so it's certainly possible. And I mean, you got to know who you are, know what motivates you, what you want to create in the world, and be fearless. Yeah,
I love that, man. Dude, I wear the dropout badge. I mean, the dropout name, like a badge of honor, man. I mean, it's and for people listening too, it's like there's more and more people joining the Successful Dropout ranks. I guess you could say. Like, I don't know if there's any more. Well, I think there are more people dropping out now, but certainly, as a result of this community, we're seeing all these people come out of the woodworks that you never would have heard of. You just hear about the big names like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, all these dropouts, but there's just more and more people coming out of the woodwork again, and again, if you're hustling, if you're ambitious, you're making things happen, or you've already made some things happen, and you are a dropout. It's like Grant said, you've defied the odds. I think it's something to be proud of, and it's something that's actually unique and sets you apart. It's like Isaac Morehouse always talks about with praxis. It's that when you're in that classroom earning that degree, right alongside the other 30 people in there, you can expect to be roughly, the average of all those people. I mean, because you're in the same box, you're checking the same boxes, you're progressing at the same rate. Do more. Think about doing more than college. Think about stepping off that conveyor belt. Even if you decide to stay in college, think about becoming more proactive and taking back control and charge of your life and your education. And I think that's what this episode has been all about. But Grant, what's the best way that people can connect with you then?
I'm really active on LinkedIn. So if you just search Grant Schroll and look for the one that has Mission Collaborative somewhere in the title, that's me.
Awesome.
Please feel free to send me a connection request. And also my website, missioncollaborative.com.
All right. Well, Successful Dropouts, you are the average of the 5 people you hang around the most, and you've been hanging out with Grant and Kylan today, learning what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. For everything we talked about today, head over to successfuldropout.com and type Grant into the search bar, and the show notes will pop right up. And as always, stay hungry, stay foolish. For more information about how to drop out, grind, and succeed, go to successfuldropout.com. I also love questions. If you have a question about anything we talked about today, I want to hear from you. Go to successfuldropout.com and click the Ask Me a Question link at the top of the page. Successful Dropouts, if you could go to iTunes and leave a positive rating and review, it would help this show out a lot. I know you're busy. I know you got a lot going on. But if you do that, it helps this podcast rank. It helps other people listen to it and gain value just like you have been. Thank you so much in advance.